As the cosmos connects the universe, water connects life. At the Cosmic Water Podcast, we're exploring the history, mythology, and future of the sacred land known as San Antonio. Hey viewers, unfortunately we had a bit of a sound glitch for the first 3 or 4 minutes of Rebecca speaking, so please bear with us as us newbies figure out all this podcasting stuff. Enjoy! Welcome to the Cosmic Water Podcast. I'm Maureen.
I'm Angela.
And we are so honored to have Rebecca Flores with us today. I wanted to start off by saying that the other day, Angela sent me a clip from this punk rock concert.
Piñata Protest.
Have you heard of them?
No.
Well, in their song, they said, Rebecca Flores, presente.
Piñata Protest.
The band.
Mm-hmm. Really?
It was part of their concert. They went, Cesar Chavez, presente.
In that lineup?
Yes.
That's proud. That makes me proud.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And last week when we were at lunch and you were talking about some organizations here in San Antonio and their activism work, and I was like, well, was Cesar Chavez like that? And it was really a moment for me where I was like, whoa. I was like, I'm sitting here asking you about something so historical and that you were part of, and that just, I'm even feeling it right now, really gave me chills. And so I guess to start off, if you could just talk about kind of your activism work there with Cesar Chavez and Delores Huerta and what that meant for you. And I think specifically for me, I'm thinking about just what I've heard from you, how grassroots it was, real organizing.
It really was totally grassroots. Because at that point, of course, when Cesar and Delores jumped in and said, we're going to organize farmworkers, farmworkers really had never been organized. They had been when the Wobblies were out organizing in the early 30s, and of course that whole wobbly movement was crushed. But for all that period from the 30s until when Cesar and Delores and his brother and their families decided they were really going to do something about the things they had always talked about, then they began some serious work. It's funny. I was talking to some folks this last week about that whole. Is that how does an individual, you think about Cesar and Delores and their families, right? Is that they took a leap of faith that they were going to do something, and they were going to be successful, right? So it was a lot of faith that they were going to be successful, and they took it. They left their cushiony jobs because at that time Cesar was the president of the community service organization out of California. It was a statewide organization. So he's getting paid pretty good money. Very middle class guy, he was driving his Volvo or whatever, and his family was good and all of that. And they said, and he of course was a farm worker, and he knew that farm workers were always excluded from anything and everything. And so he motioned and made an appeal to the board of CSO to spread out and go and organize farm workers in the fields rather than just people sitting in the city, people in the urban areas, Mexican Americans in the urban areas. And the board said, no, we're not going to do that. And so he quit. He quit his job, and he and his family, Helen and all of his, he had 8 kids, left. They left for Delano. And Doris went with him and her family. By that time, I don't know how many children she had. And then Richard and his family. And so he had a core group of people who knew him and respected his ideas, and probably went along, of course went along with his ideas, and they struck out. And so in 1962, he established the CSO. And one of the things that is so very important to understand, that things don't just happen. Fantastic things just don't happen, right? It takes so much groundwork to get there, right? So he started organizing with the help of Fred Ross, who was the primo organizer, and doing house meetings. And when I started doing house meetings here in South Texas, that was really the key of getting people to understand what a union was
Mm-hmm.
and why they were in the fight, right? And so we had a very simple agenda. I don't know what his agenda was, but our agenda was very, very simple. This is what would happen. We had a union hall. We had a hall, and people would walk in because they had problems, right? They have problems accessing services that are supposed to be accessible but are difficult to access. And so they would walk in, and I would receive them. And so I would help them with whatever the problem was. And then I would say, would you care to have a house meeting in your house? And in your house, just invite people who you know that are farm workers, people who respect you, people people who are friends of yours. And they did. By and large, everybody said, yes, let's do that. And so since farm workers at that time, because of their poverty, the only housing they could find were in colonias. And colonias in South Texas are unincorporated little villages that are outside city limits and don't have any city support, right? They don't have streets, they don't have lights, they don't have sewage, they don't have water, they don't have anything. But farm workers wanted a place. They always want a place to come back to, because when you migrate, you leave, right? And you got to come back to some place. And at that time, there was no public housing in South Texas, and so they had to buy a little piece of land. Whatever the conditions in buying buying that land were, they had to buy it, and they would eke out their monthly payment. These were called deeds of contracts of deed, or something like that, where you pay $5 a month. And the deal is that if you miss a month, then you start at the first base all over again. You pay for that lot, time and time and time and time again. It works for poor people, right?
Yeah.
But they take a hit, right? Because when they don't pay, they have to start all over again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was their place. At any rate, so they lived in these colonias, and so that was where we went. That was where we'd go. And they knew each other. They would all work for the same crew leaders, the troqueros, and they worked together, and so they had a bond. It might have been a family bond, or it could have been friends, but they were workers too. And of course, then the whole families worked. It was the husband and wife and the kids all jumped up on those trucks and went off to work. And so that's how we started organizing. We would ask 3 simple questions, and it was 3 meetings that we took time, developed the issues and stuff, because we didn't assume any issues. And so we would ask, what are the problems you face in the fields? And they would tell us everything and we would carry the same question to different houses and in different colonias, throughout the valley. And from that, then we started putting together what the commonality was, what were the most important ones that people talked about, and then we knew those were going to be our priorities. Yeah. But one of the other things that we made sure of doing was saying, then who's gonna take care of these problems? Because I think it's very easy for people to think, well, you are, Rebecca, you're the one, right? You're gonna take care of our problems, and we really established the knowledge and the I guess they were invested in this whole thing, is that we are the union. All of us are the union, and so if there's any problem out there, all of us are gonna have to take care of it. And so they agreed to that. And so then I would say, okay, will you sign on to agree to being part of this union? And they would sign on. We had little cards, and they would sign on and stuff. And so that's how we developed our membership, and that's how we developed our organizations. We started doing this in the spring of 1978. It took us till 1983 to pass our first major legislation, which was workers' compensation. And so what I'm saying is that things don't change immediately, right? There was a lot of activities that we had in between. Every year we'd have a convention. Conventions were important because it showed the workers the power that they had when everybody convened, right? The first convention that we had in January of 1979, we had 1,000 delegates on the floor of that convention floor. And it was powerful because then workers began to see that they had power. Really, it's really about because if you're by yourself against this big grower down there, you don't have it. You ask for a wage or increase, they'll say, "Oh, who are you? Get out of here. If you don't like working here, leave." And so they began to see that together they created some power. And so We would have annual conventions. We would have marches. We would have strikes in the field. We would have all these things to begin to show workers that being together and showing the world that we had a strength by the numbers is that we in fact were, were somebody to deal with. Because before that, I was a farm worker. And maybe I'm going too long.
No, go for it.
I was a farm worker, and we lived in Atascosa County, just south of San Antonio. And let me tell you, we never thought we could ask for anything. Yeah. We just went to work. And that includes my mom and my dad, right? They said, okay, we're here to work. And so they never asked for, what are we getting paid for? How long are we going to work? Do we have anything going for us? And we never had anything going for us. Nothing, absolutely nothing. It was very, very undignified. For the work that we did, raising up the agricultural industry on our shoulders, and it was something that we had nothing. We had no benefits. We had absolutely no benefit. There were no field sanitation, which is important, for everybody, not only for the worker but for the consumer, so that that if you don't have toilets out there in the fields, you may have contaminated food. But it's also for our health. We wouldn't urinate, because we were embarrassed. Where do we go? It just messes up your whole system. And of course our health and the heat and the lack of drinking water and the exposure to the elements. And at that time, the chemicals weren't used as much, although DDT was in fact used at that time. But all the other chemicals that we're using now, those are developed, in the last 50 years, something like that. But in that period, it was a few. But I'm not saying they weren't dangerous, but there weren't so many, because we used to thin and weed. Now there's chemicals to thin, to get rid of the weeds, right? So you don't have thinning and weeding crews as much anymore. So there's all kinds of chemicals that were put together to take care of some of the worker issues, right? And that way the growers could get rid of the workers, because they never want a worker. They want things to be done, but they don't want the business of a human being saying, hey, we need some water. Hey, we need a toilet. They want to get away from all that. So they had the best next thing, which was a worker who never said anything, right? And that was who we were. And so when I started organizing, when I finally, after a long period of time, of course, in 1965, when the great strike started and the great boycott went all across the country, then we began to think, well, heck, you mean workers could do something in the fields? And so we as workers began to open up our eyes. By that time, of course, I was not working in the fields anymore. I graduated from high school. I had a job, but nevertheless, I was very interested in what happened to farm workers. And so we began to think, what, you mean people can ask for something? Can we ask for a wage? What? And that's the same thing that I found in the Valley when I started organizing. When I started the house meetings in 1978, was that workers had no sense that they could ask for anything. The first meeting that I had in one of the colonias there, I asked the question, what are your problems in the fields? And one of the workers said, hey, Rebecca, we don't have any problems. And I thought, and I was like floored. I said, and the response that response is because people thought that was their due, right? This is our life, and that we have to do what we can with it. And so then I said, but then what about this? What about your wages? Oh yeah, they steal our wages. And what about your Social Security? Oh yeah, the crew leader pockets the Social Security. And so it was only when we began to talk about specifics, they knew it all, right? But they just thought they had to hunker down and just accept it all. And that pretty much was how everybody was, including my family and I. We say, well, that's the way life is. Drive, when we used to migrate, when we migrated, we drive hundreds of miles, and we thought, well, it's part of the job. But it isn't part of the job, right? Because it's your car, it's your gas, and we were never reimbursed for all that. We just had to appear on work day and get to work, right? Mm-hmm. Have your stuff with you. We used to pick cotton in the Mathis area, which is 100 miles from here. Mm-hmm. And we had to take our cotton sacks and just get in there, just work. The crew leader, I don't know who really Dad would deal with that, is he gave us a house to live in. It was a terrible house. It had a big hole in the ceiling and no water, no running water. We had a spigot outside, no kitchen, no nothing. We just had to sleep there. Isn't that something? We were providing work. We were providing their labor, and we were little. That was when I was in 52. So I was 9 going on 10, 52 and 53. I was 10 years old and working, hauling cotton.
It's hard for me not to get a little bit emotional about to hear you talk about this. My father was born in 1954 in Michoacan, Mexico, and they eventually ended up in Tijuana, where he crossed over by himself, and he's a teenager, maybe 12 or something like that, and he started working the fields and followed the work up to Washington State and back, and eventually he had connections to Texas, where he moved, and so he was no longer a farm worker here in Texas. He worked in the city, had city jobs. Everybody loved him here because he was from California right before the Cesar Chavez stuff started happening. Mm-hmm. So they were like, oh, California, and he had like the style and stuff like that. But San Antonio treated him really well. But the ideas, though, when it comes to labor, stuck with him, not asking for what he's deserving of and that sort of a thing still to this day. And but yeah, like he grew up like that, like be happy with what you have. And they were hard workers. They had a ranch in Mexico, and that eventually got taken from them. But yeah, so I feel so honored to hear you talk about these things. Yeah, children,
That's what I was thinking of. It made me wonder if like the conditions are still like that, right?
Yeah, there is, unless you have a union contract, and those, it's very, very hard to get unions contracts because you're fighting the industry, right? And for when you look at Starbucks, right, you have all these hipsters and they're all college educated and everything going after Starbucks, and they're having a hard time, right? Because they get fired if whatever, for any reason whatsoever, right? You'll get ousted, and then you have to deal with that as an individual. And these are young folks. But when you look at farm work, many times you have no options because you don't have the education. Generally, by and large, you don't have an education. You can say, well, I can leave this field and go get me a job, somewhere else. I can be a I-tech or techie, because you have no option. So you have to stick it out. You say, well, I either bend over and just take it and keep working, or tomorrow I don't have food for my families. Wow. And that's always a struggle, is that, do I do this and do I risk? So when Cesar pulled off the union strike, one of the things that he had to do is train people to understand that they had to save their money. Right? If we're going to do this, whatever money you have, you better save it, because you got to pay your rent, you got to buy your groceries, that kind of stuff. But then he had to go around the country and ask for support from different unions. And the unions across this country, especially the UAW in Detroit, and right now, of course, they're in a big strike too. They supported the union, from the very get-go. It was Walter Reuther and his brother, I can't remember his brother's name, but they were fantastic. I think they were communists, but generally labor came out of the Communist Party, but they were always so supportive of the farm workers, and they gave Cesar a lot of money to support them when they were in that strike. And so you always have to think of that as an individual family. You have to think about it, and it's always scary, but scarier for those folks who have no options, who can't say, well, I'll go on a strike. Let's say the mother says, I'll go on the strike, but you, husband, are going to have to go and find yourself a job somewhere else so you can continue to support me. It just doesn't work that way with farm worker families. So that is a big problem with maintaining income inside the family.
I think I remember reading that about Emma Tenayuka organizing here in San Antonio too. The pecan shellers is that was part of it. That's what she was doing, was helping everybody take care of each other's child care, getting the funds for rent and stuff. All of that. I come from a family of union workers. Like my dad was a painter and his dad was a carpenter. My other grandpa's was a mailman union, and then my great grandpa was an electrician in like the 1920s when they were fighting for unions. And I remember my grandma saying that when she was a kid, he had to like carry a gun around with him because the cops were after him because the government was on the big boss's side. And so, but there just seems to be such a difference still that like farm workers is still like the most intense organizing because they didn't have that. Like they still, I don't know, like there was more privilege. Basically is what it comes down to. That was like white people organizing unions, whereas farm workers tend to be indigenous. And I remember driving down from Portland, Oregon back here to San Antonio and stopping in all these small towns and making note of that every single one of these small towns, which are like farm towns, usually, had like a brown population or a Hispanic population. I was like, those are the farm workers. And I remember, like, when I was researching the Irish, when there was a basic, like, genocide attempt against them, and what it came from was the English taking all their land and then making them rent it in order to farm off of. And it made me think about how indigenous people here knew this land, just like the Irish knew their land, knew how to farm it, and that to this day, we have indigenous populations still farming the land for us all. And the way I grew up in like Philly, I like didn't realize like food actually grew from trees, right? Like it was just like we just bought the produce from the grocery store. So that when I actually went to like my ex-husband's house and she picked me figs off of a tree, it was like the first time I ever had fresh food, like or even saw food come out of the ground. And so it just all like comes together for me, and that like there's not appreciation for where our food comes. There's not the recognition that it's like still indigenous Americans still farming all of our food, and we're still not giving them all of the rights necessary.
I think that you hit up on this, the comparison between the Irish and the Mexicans here is the same, right? Because pretty much what happened, this is part of Mexico, right? And Mexicans own this place, and we worked it and all of that. So when the Anglos came in to settle and to take over this state with Austin, Stephen F. Austin, what they did is really just displaced all the people who were living here for forever before, right? Displaced them, took their land, and those same folks who used to work those lands were now working on them rather than owning them. So they became workers and not owners of those fields, and so it created the migrant population, because then they couldn't live off of that work, right? So they had to go and then go to next door to this other, grower's land, and then go here to kind of eke out a living year round, and so that's pretty much what happens now. We were talking about the whole issue of what you said is people don't know where things come from, where our food comes from, and they used to call, and they probably still do, farm workers hands, right? Just hands. Like there's not a human being attached to it, just hands, because that's all they want is just a hand, right? Just get there and harvest, and don't do anything else. And so when I know, because this is how it was in the valley, we had thousands of farm workers living there, and they would take care of all of that agriculture. But they did not have the skill that a farmer has in knowing when to plant. I think many of them do. I'm not going to say they're all that way. when to plant, what to plant, what to plant next to it, because that has been erased from our memory, right? It's when you plant something, what do you plant next to it, so you take care of the bugs, right? And so we lost all that knowledge, and we've got to regain it. We've got to regain it. No, of course, all we have now are little lots here in the city, but we can regain it. We've got to start learning once again the whole process of growing our own food, and how to use the old ways in making this production work for us, because we are in fact losing that ability. And frankly, if you go to the grocery store right now, it's pricing us out of good nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that money goes into the hands of corporations, big agricultural corporations. They're not. Everyone assumes that these are small family farms. They're not. The small family farmer has lost his farm or her farm. We did. We had 40 acres in Atascosa County. We lost it. We lost it because of conditions, of weather conditions. We couldn't hold it anymore, and so we lost our farm. And so that's what happened to a lot of farmers. If you go to Atascosa County now, it used to be pretty much owned by Mexicans. A lot of them, my family, my cousins, they're pretty much owned by big corporations now.
I mean, Bill Gates owns most of the farmland in the country.
Really? Oh God! And all you see now is grass. You know, they'll have some cows, and they'll have some grass to feed them, but they don't have the row crops.
Right. It used to be small farms with actually growing food, and now it's more cows.
Beef,
right?
beef,
Yeah.
and then the grass to feed them, and a huge acreage. But we used to have small farms. My dad had 40 acres, and the people across the road had a few acres, right? And we could see, we grew the strawberries, we grew the tomatoes, we grew the watermelon, that kind of stuff, and so we had our family, and then my cousins had theirs, and we would go from our family to their family. We would work with them, so we would lend our help to all of our relatives, so that they could get their stuff to market too. And that's how we handled it. And I don't think there was any money crossed palms there, because I don't think so, but I don't know. But that's how we managed, and we managed to live off of that, because I was born in 1943. At that time, there was no public assistance, none at all. So you really had to make sure that what you grew, you ate, and made a little bit of money to buy your other essentials. But you didn't have that much of an overhead at all. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have gas. We had a car, a tractor, the water was a pump. So we had basic things that we lived off of. Now, of course, you can't do that. You can't do any of that anymore. None of it. You could try. People who are homeless try, but they can't. Because they can't get the food anywhere, or the water. They have to buy the water. So you really can't anymore.
And in organizing, is it true y'all really stuck to I guess paying yourselves a humble wage, I guess I would say.
Yeah, it's true. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely true. And that was a philosophy Cesar had, and he integrated it into the union, that we would, in the beginning, we paid $5 a week. And I agree that we couldn't live off of $5 a week, but we made do with it. And so, and it was making sure that we had, that we, for example, even to this day, I never buy anything new. I don't. I eat simple foods. I don't buy, I really don't buy meat or anything like that. So we learn how to eat and live simply rather than extravagantly. And what he said it was really true. He says, if you have money in your pocket, if you get a lot of money, then you're out consuming. You're out to the mall, you're out buying things and stuff like that. When you don't have money, you don't think about doing that. And that is the absolute truth.
Oh yeah, it is.
That is the absolute truth. Yeah. And I follow that. I spend money now, of course. Now I'm 80, so I figure I can spend a little bit. But during the period that I worked in South Texas, it was austere. I was married at that time, and he was working with the ACLU, and so he got some income. And so we managed that way, but I didn't get paid for the work that I did. And I worked all the time. And I
Okay.
had babies during that time too. And so I had house meetings every night. I hauled my little kids around with me. And of course that also was a good thing to do. Not only for my children, but also it came out to be an example modeling for the women farm workers, to them, saying, you know what, we can all do this. And look at me, I have all these kids, and I'm working, I'm doing this, and it's a dignified campaign kind of work that we do, because families are involved, and as long as we maintain that respect, which is so important, and you have to respect the families that you go and visit, then you begin to establish a foundation of respect and dignity in the union, and then say that you merit that respect and dignity from everybody else.
Do you attend house meetings now with any organization or any group?
I don't frankly think there's any organization in San Antonio that's doing house meetings.
Mm-hmm. I attended some with a group called Cops Metro. I'm no longer with them, but that was with the UU church. But I can see in practice how, that creates that covenant or relational connection with people, and where you get like boots on the ground kind of conversations about what are the problems, what are the issues.
And the more I think about it, is that organizations are so vital for all of us, right? Is how do you come to grips with something that's going on in this country, right? The only way to do that is if you talk it over with people, and you come to kind of a knowledge about what, how is this, whatever it is, right? How is this affecting us, me individually, but us as a community? Because if you sit around thinking on your own, you may come, off with a totally different perspective. And so I believe in organizations. I absolutely do. But I think the conversation starts on one-on-one or in a small group, so that you can start batting about ideas. Mm-hmm. I really think that we need to have organizations that do house meetings. And I think we got to differentiate between a house meeting or organization and organizing, grassroots organizing, and events. Events are different. I think events are part of organizing, right? For example, once we had a foundation of folks who were in the union and who believed in the issues and stuff, then we would have events. Then we would have marches, right? And so these would be the people who would do that, right? They say, okay, it's time to say something about whatever's going on. They would have marches. And so those groups that just have events for events' sake don't do that groundwork. And maybe they can from the people who come to the event, right? Maybe they can do that kind of follow-up. But I don't think that there is, frankly, I don't think there's money dedicated to that kind of work, because it is long-term work. It is long-term work. I don't think when I look at organizations, their budgets, I don't think they include that in their total plans to get to their event.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you have faith in organizations, because mine has plummeted a lot over the past few years. And I really appreciate that distinction, because I was going to ask that. I was like, how do you maintain an organization without all of the problems that seem to inevitably come up, of like the hierarchy of power and them just maintaining that power without doing all of that groundwork? And that seems to be it. I was wondering, didn't you have neighborhood meetings for your neighbors at one point regarding the gentrification?
Yeah. Well, we never got to the neighborhood, because this was during the pandemic and people didn't want to get out.
Okay.
But I did one-on-ones with my neighbors, and we did have like a little gathering once in our neighborhood where we had a large number of folks come out. But it was about gentrification. It was only on that idea. But then the pandemic hit, and we just kind of like, everybody was afraid of coming out, and so we didn't continue it any
this
further.
was actually one of my favorite stories to show of how ridiculous gentrification is in the city. But we did like what was that for? For Everyone Home. There was a
Yes,
project going here in the city of San Antonio where they were trying to figure out solutions to displacement. Really, I think their goal was to just bring community land trusts, which is a good idea, but I think that was this organization's intention. But anyway, they organized this event where they brought a bus of people from different cities, a bunch of our city workers around the south side, to see what displacement looks like. And there was an event in Rebecca's neighborhood. And Wall, do you want to tell this?
Well, I may forget some, so please jump in. So this is what happened. So we had this huge, I would say we had about 20 people, right? In the front yard there. It was at a house that was next to the San Pedro Creek, which is being, fixed so that we're being gentrified. At any rate, so there we were. We had all these people. We had taken all of the postcards that we'd received from people who want to buy our property, and we'd hung them in a clothesline, and it was a long line of postcards that we stuck up there with some clips, and so we were waiting, and the bus was late, right? And so finally the bus comes, and this stinky diesel bus parks itself right in front of us like that, and it never turns off, right? He just kept spitting out this hot air and fumes and all of that stuff. And so we thought that everyone was going to get off and we could talk, right? And they chose not to. Nobody wanted to get off. And finally, and that was when Vero was director of the housing here in San Antonio, and she wouldn't get off either. And we said, but what is the point of all this? Here we want to talk, and we're ready, and we want to talk, and nobody would get off the bus. That was the weirdest event that I have ever been part of.
It was so indicative of what they really think.
They were sitting on the bus. They wouldn't get off the bus, right?
Like, nice little show, all these cute people out here. But no, right before the bus even came, remember some guy, white guy pulls up in a car, and he's like, hey, I wasn't there. You guys said,
yes.
Hey, can we buy your house?
Yes.
Yes.
So this guy was parked over there, and he'd been watching us for a while. We said, I don't know who that guy is. And so he drives up, and he says, he says, what are y'all doing? I said, well, we're being gentrified, and we're having whatever. I explained what we were doing there. And he says, hey, I want to buy your house. He was a gentrifier. Hello, right? He never got the message. The message wasn't clear, I guess, that we were protesting gentrification, and he was a gentrifier.
Oh.
And I have to say, there's solutions. There are solutions and frameworks that are there. Like, my father was able to have his house flipped through the city program called owner occupied rehab. But because, in his neighborhood, you have all these elders who have paid off their mortgages. They've kept their humble jobs. Their wages have remained the same despite everything else going up over the years. You don't have the kind of money to do your foundation, replace the plumbing, replace the electrical work. A lot of these homes are built in the 20s and teens, right? And so they find their elders now in these houses that are falling apart. So then they give in when they come and ask and make these, offers. And so my dad, I would advocate for him, go down into the office, the city office, and they say that it's a lottery system. And these opportunities, because it's a forgivable loan. It's a forgivable loan. They flipped his house. They redid the foundation, the roofing, the electrical, the plumbing. And this was but right before we had that snowstorm a couple of years ago. So we were so lucky that our pipes did not bust open like a lot of our neighbors. They didn't go through what we had brand new insulation. So as much as it sucked, we were able to get through it without severe, consequences. And so to me, like, that's an answer. It just has a tiny little budget where they tell us, oh, it's a lottery system. These people are so deserving more of a lottery system. We need to stop giving the developers incentives and using the money for that, and just put all that money into. I mean, that's one way to fight gentrification, I think.
And houselessness.
In fact, the guy across the street ended up selling his house, and his son became houseless after he sold. And it's a developer who lives there now, and he can't sell his house because he flipped it so fancy that nobody wants to pay what it's actually worth now, because they don't want to live next door to us. But, there's answers. There's a solution. We can totally combat this. It's greed. It's greed.
It's government funded. This is what Rebecca and I are presenting at the Health Equity Forum.
Nice, which I'm registered to attend.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about last week, is how gentrification is government funded in overinflation of land.
And developed by the government. We can go back to the decade of the downtown. Remember that one? That was 2010, right?
Joaquin Castro.
Right.
Julian
Castro. And where his idea was, well, we need to revive the downtown area, and without thinking of the collateral damage, right? Same thing with Sarah, the San Antonio River Authority. They did all that creek development without thinking of the collateral damage. And so all this money, and it is generally our money, our taxpayer money. There's some other money, but it's probably developer money because their interest is there. And so nobody looks at the collateral damage to those kinds of projects and say, well, that's pretty much what happened with Vecinos of Mission Trails, right? Is that they fixed the river, it was gorgeous, and then the owners of this mobile home park, that was a home for over 100 families in mobile homes, sold it, and he said, you got to get out. I'll give you a period of time to get out. And now they have this humongous, horrible looking, I think, castle there right on the river, and just peering over the river. And so they had primo land, and that's what they do, right? Is they hold on to the property until it gets, and don't do anything to upkeep, right? Until it gets investor, interest. They sell it and make money. And then they build their beautiful. I've always said, why can't poor people be next to beautiful things? That's what I always say. Why can't I be next to a beautiful river?
That's how I felt about the San Pedro Creek renovation and living at Soapworks. And you know who owned Soapworks in Town Center before that? Was Lifshitz of Blue
right?
Star. So yeah, he let it just go to nothing. And then he sold it to this investor in Houston who, kind of renovated. He was trying to increase the land value or property value, right? So that he could sell it for more eventually to now Weston Urban just bought it. And so, it's like they're just waiting for this business district vision that they have of that part of downtown to happen. And meanwhile, that was the last 381 naturally affordable working class apartments downtown, and everyone just displaced from it.
And at the same time, and even though I know the mayor and the city council hate to have people say this is considered a low-wage town. There was just a statistic. Did you see that in this last week that shows that San Antonio increased the number of poor people in its population, increased rather than decreased. And so when they say, oh no, we're not a low-wage town, don't say that. But San Antonio likes that, likes that definition, because they lure in the tourist industry.
Yes.
Tourist industry is nothing but cheaply paid wages. It's the restaurant industry, it's the hotel industry, and that they make buku money. They make so much money with people coming in and renting, and yet they don't pay their workers a decent salary. And those workers then can't live nearby. They have to live way out and come in on the buses to work here because there is no affordable apartments in this downtown area. And so then the developer, I have a thing about that, because the developers come in. It was a law passed by a developer at the state level. Jim Plummer is the attorney for developers. He passed a law that allows property tax exemptions to developers if they include in all the total units a certain amount of what's considered affordable units. But they never define affordable, and they never define the size of the unit, and it's really not affordable for people, for poor families to live in. It's just not affordable to them. You have to earn what, three times your rental. You have to. So if your rent is $800, you have to earn 3 times that a month to be able to. But when you rent a place, and I guess this is still true, you have to pay the monthly rent, then you have to pay 2, I think, the one before and then the deposit. So you have to pay 3 months of rent. Do people have that amount of money in their pocket to pay? No, they don't. They don't. People live paycheck to paycheck anymore. And we're not even talking about people who are disabled, who are not able to work, who have issues, or elderly. Let's talk about elderly, who are on, like you said, who are on fixed incomes, maybe, and you know that Social Security and SSI, which are, SSI goes like to $800, $900 a month. That's if you don't qualify for Social Security. Social Security can go anywhere, right? It can start low and it can go high. But if you've been a low-wage worker all your life, you're going to get a low monthly check from Social Security. And so there's just, you cannot get out of your holes. You cannot get out of your holes. And then, of course, medical care, food, everything else. It's just difficult for people who are poor to make it in this country anymore, in this town, probably anywhere in this country anymore. Difficult. And I hate to sound that way, because certainly there's got to be a light out there, but I don't see one. All the city programs and stuff are so inaccessible.
They're so inaccessible, and a lot of them are just plain performative. So I participated in another city program called, I think it was Ready to Work. I could be wrong, because there's similar ones, I think. But I did a certification. They paid us $15 an hour as students. I think maybe it was like 6 months of school. And then I did my clinicals at Methodist Hospital, where I was eventually hired. But I was being paid $12.50 an hour, less than the student. 15 is low already, I hate to be a complainer or whatever, but realistically, that still wouldn't have been enough to live off of. It's not a living wage. And so 12 was even, and then made me think, what kind of unions do we have going on in the hospitals? Because I would hear so much, injustice sort of going on there. But, so unfortunately, a lot of these city efforts can be performative too, And
absolutely. Absolutely. They lay out all the...
Right. The amount of money going out in the marketing for it.
This is all that's available, and yet how do you get it? How do you access it? I was at a meeting with the Department of Labor Women's Bureau woman, and she invited a number of people, and I was a community person. I was the only one community person. And Juanita Reina from Fuerza Unida, she was the other community person. But she had an organization. I came in, bald. I didn't have any organization. And so everybody's talking about how great their group was and what they did and how successful they were and then of course I just threw hot water on them, and I thought but I said, you can talk about that all the time, but you really don't reach those folks who are in fact needing of everything you're pushing, and that's why we continue to be a low-wage town, because you don't reach that population. And they have fantastic data, They've had fantastic data.
Yeah.
And it just, and so, anyway, let me just say this, because I think it's also, I like your word performative. So when I said, talked about people who are ignored and who are not part of their programs, I was the last one to talk. Before they talk some more, and they changed their language, but I don't know what that means, right? It's just performative, right? So then they said yes, and we need to get out, and we need to get into those communities that are poor. I said, it just look at the demographic. If all you do is look at where poor people live, just go there, knock on doors and say, hey, what's going on? Why can't you get in work, ready to work? And that was a discussion, ready to work, at that thing. Why is it not up to optimum like they originally planned, right? Well, there's all kinds of reasons for it. And
there are a whole bunch of hiccups going through the program.
And so you fix it, right? You fix it. But how do you fix it? Well, you find out what the hiccups are. And until you talk to folks.
On the ground. Yeah,
on the ground, then you're never going to find out. And so I sometimes, sometimes I think, and I'm not that, what's the word? I'm not that popular. I'm not, when a lot of people want.
Cool. I'm sorry, but they said your name in a song at a concert.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Show.
That's some clout right there.
Listen to me. In terms of people don't want my opinions. I mean, they will listen to them because I think this whole thing about community engagement and all that, it's like a coined word now. It says, okay, we have to have Rebecca Flores come in and talk and scream at us, and that's it, and we'll ignore her, until the next event. And that's why I kind of hesitate in participating in a lot of these things, because what am I, a show? Are we shows? Are we shows? Is that what we're used for? And some folks says, well, Rebecca, if you don't say it, nobody else is going to say it. And I thought, well, you know what? I don't know. So anyway, I'm up in the air about it. I really am. I think there's some use for me saying these things. But if all they can say is, yes, we're gonna get the marginalized included, and we'll figure that out. But if that's all they do is change our language, then what's the point of it all? Yeah. But this has been This has been my life, right? I've been screaming about this forever. I mean, started with Farmworkers, but man, it's hard to change these systems, because people want to cream. They want to get the cream of the crop, and they don't want to have any trouble, And those are your good statistics, right? Yeah, she's got her GED. She comes to work, and she doesn't have babies, and she gets on the bus easy. What about all those others that don't have it? They don't have the GED. They have a bunch of babies. They can't manage the bus. What happened to them, and why aren't they included in another way? So, and that's here. That's here in San Antonio. I know some of them that can't do it, and yet they need it. So I don't know what the answer is. But going back to organization, there are organizations there's the 501c3s need to have a different concept of what they could be doing. It's not just they've got to start thinking outside their money system, right? I was given money to do this. Let me just do this. They've got to expand their vision and start really developing organization for those issues that they are dealing with, right? That they're and develop a good organization, develop a community organization. And that's the only way we're going to change things. That is the only way we're going to change things, if people are able to speak up from their truth, from their experience, and hopefully people will listen to them.
Hopefully, because it's just like those 501c3s. And that's a good point, because I was just thinking about our presentation on Friday and how we came up with the solution of democratic participation, participatory practices, which is like there's like academic research behind this, and like that's the best way to present it to the crowd at this health equity forum. But ultimately, it becomes performative. Now we're just giving them the language and the information so that they can go out and say all of these things. And so I was thinking how one of the things that we can stress a lot is that none of this means anything without action, because that's also part of participatory action research. And if you're not doing the active part of it and then reflecting on it and then acting again, then it's just performative. And then I'm glad that you brought up the 501c3s, all the nonprofits, because that's a whole other issue about how they take up space speaking for people when really they need to be the ones who are just sort of acting as liaisons of like, how do we give more power to these people. But yeah, they're so caught up in for me, it really comes down to what I've witnessed is individual power struggles where they want to be the ones who get a program approved by the city, and they can put that on their grant proposals, and then they can put that on their resume for their next job because they don't even like their job at nonprofits usually, often. And so yeah, these are just some of the solutions I'm brainstorming, and also things to say, right? Because I feel that way too. I mean, yeah, I'm not popular either.
Really?
Whoops.
Maybe me
We're
too.
the outliers here. Are you?
That's why I'm cracking up when me and Rebecca talked together on Friday. I'm like, how did this
work?
How did we come together? Who approved this? I'm glad they did. But then I'm also nervous that they did, because I'm like, we are not just like community tokens here to just say, hey, you guys have to also listen to community. It's like, actually go and do it. Like, what do we have to do? Get our like mean mom hats on, like grandma hats, right? Disciplinary actions to get them to actually start doing it. It's really frustrating.
It is. Oh, it is.
And I don't know.
I don't know the answer. It's gotta be ground up. Is the only answer. And then the issue then is how do you get that platform for the ground up? I don't know.
I feel like history has a lot to do with it. In education, knowing your history might be one part of where action comes from, because then you get so angry when you know the history of how long this has been happening. My mother was displaced from Hemisphere. Their house was razed in 68. And beyond my mom and her grandfather who owned the house, we also had, they had houses in King Williams. They owned properties, all scattered throughout Southtown and downtown. And now nobody owns any of that. Property.
Weston Urban owns it.
Right.
He's doing the Hemisphere Hotel or whatever.
And also when we're talking about developers too, in 68, it was HB Zachary who got that contract, and they have it again. So, it's the same plays. It's the same plays.
Same players.
And we are all the same families doing all this together. It's throughout the generations. It's the same things happening, but this is all of us doing, we're all in this together. And so the more people know the history, I think hopefully, especially with things like some media and being able to share knowledge, without having to, because they're not teaching this in school. I didn't learn about you in school, I didn't learn about Emma Tenayuka at school, and that leads me to a different, if it's okay, question. I just wanted to get, I guess, your quick, if you have any knowledge of the Texas Rangers.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's been that was an eye-opening thing for me. And there's talk about like our monuments and what statues should stay, and are we erasing history and that sort of a thing. So, the Confederate statue downtown, they got rid of, that was on Travis Park, but we still have Confederate statues. Colonel Thomas Frost was a Confederate soldier, and that still remains there. And the legacy of Frost is still continues, and the narrative about him, it's still sort of like a hero and that sort of thing. When I read everything that they put out about him, when I read his history, I don't see that. I don't, he started his business from a monopoly of wool. And so when I look up the definition for monopoly, it's not a good thing. It's not an honorable thing. So I guess I just wanted to ask you what your knowledge is about the Texas Rangers. Also, in some indigenous groups, you'll see them acknowledging, indigenous people that were Texas Rangers themselves. But to me, it's like, does that make it any better? Like, so.
Yeah. Well, the Rangers were set up before the Republic, which was 1836. So they were supposed to, control the Indians that were living here, because the Indians were attacking the colonists.
Yeah, that's how Frost started. It
Yeah.
wasn't. It was before the Rangers,
Before
but he already had his
yeah.
little.
And then they continued, and there was a lot of Mexicanos who were Rangers also after 1836, because that was part of controlling and solidifying the republic. And then of course we know all the stuff written, because it's not in books, right? People have had to scrounge around in old newspapers to find, and then what oral history has been passed from family to family, from generation to generation, and how it's been collected. And there are now some books, about written by families who know the history of their relatives being shot and killed by Rangers just because, right? Mm-hmm. And really, a lot of it was to scare them off their property, and that was really what the whole thing was: is scare you off your property. And I have never had my personal experience with the Rangers. Okay, I have with the DPS. I've been thrown in jail a few times, but that's another story. But with the Rangers, was the most recent one was in the 1966 Farmworker strike in Starr County, and that was a strike that was huge, with people who were harvesting melons in the summer of 1966, and so they had been organizing the workers there in Starr County, and then they called June the 1st would be the first day of the strike when everybody would not work, and it was successful. But also on June the 1st, the Rangers were there. So the growers had called in the Rangers, but the Rangers are paid by us, right? They're taxpayer supported, and yet they were on the Rangers' side, right? They were there, toting their guns, protecting the growers, protecting the produce, right? So that the produce could get to market. And so in the process, they wanted to bash and destroy the unionizing effort. And they did it by hitting people, by throwing people in jail. They would throw people. The first day they arrested Eugene Nelson, who was the organizer, came out of California. They arrested him for trespass, for some cockamamie reason, and they threw him in jail. And so that's a message, right? That is the message that everybody learns. Look, they threw our leader in jail. Mm-hmm. And so they did that. They did that systematically, and they went after every leader, and they threw him in jail. There was, I would say 70 people thrown in jail from that organizing effort. And they would stay in jail one day, a week, or whatever. They would stay in jail. They would be arrested for praying on the county courthouse steps. Praying. Mm. They would get arrested for saying a cuss word. Mm-hmm. It was just like for any little reason, and then of course for picketing. They had a picket line in front of the shed, and they were arrested for that. And so this went on for the course of the melon. The melon season is short because the melons grow and then they're gone. So it's not longer than 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And so they did that for the duration of that. And so anyway, that ended that year with a march that started in Rio Grande City and came up to Austin. So that was the end of that strike. Then it continued the next year. But the history of the Rangers was that after that happened, there was some attorneys who took this, who filed a lawsuit in the federal courts against the Rangers. It was Pancho Medrano, who was a UAW member, who had been beat up by the Rangers, versus Captain Allee, Allee. He was a captain that was over the Rangers there. And so this lawsuit went to federal court, to the federal system, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the strikes happened in 66. In 1972, this is, 6 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court came down and said that the Rangers were used against unconstitutionally, because in the Constitution we have a right to assemble, and that's part of that we had a right to assemble, and so they one of the things that they said is that from here on out the Rangers can never be used to to destroy a unionizing effort. And so from that period on, the Rangers haven't been used for that. Before that, and I probably Emma Yucca came up against them, but I remember reading where Yucapawa, which also was organizing in South Texas in the 30s and the 40s, and Yucapawa was not an AFL-CIO, it was another union, and they started organizing the cotton pickers in Harlingen, and they had committees and they had an office, and then the Rangers. See, cotton also is just seasonal, right? And so people leave, right? They migrate and stuff. And so anyway, so the Rangers came in and busted up that union, and Yucapawa then left. And so that's what happens, right? Is that when you do when they do those kinds of things, people get scared, and you kind of have to get up and leave. In this instance, though, the workers didn't get scared, but the union effort was dead, right? It was just too much for those workers. It was too much, but the union stayed there. So from 1966 to now, the United Farmworkers have been in the Valley. So that's what, 60 years? 60 years, something like that, 60 years. And so it's transitioned. I got there in 1975, became director of union from 75 to 2005. And in the process, though, if you know what's happened in this country, NAFTA hit in the 90s. And so from one day to the next, all the growers went to Mexico.
Free trade.
For the free trade. And so we lost a lot of the row crops, and a lot of the workers didn't have work anymore. And so a lot of the workers that were members of the union, who were the bulk of what we're there for, right, weren't there anymore. And so we had to change and transition into this group called LUPE, La Unión del Pueblo Entero, which is a community organization dedicated to community development rather than farmworker issues. And so it's different, but it's still organizing workers, people in colonias. And so that's how we managed. We have had to transition ourselves, right, to as things have changed, as things change all the time. But what I did notice, a little bit ago, I was down there, and it's very interesting. So I hit up some fields. I hit up on some fields and stuff, and I found a field that was growing. You know that curly cabbage, that curly leafed cabbage? Is it Chinese cabbage? Well, anyway, it's a different kind of cabbage that I don't eat, right? And leeks. I hit on two fields, that curly cabbage and leeks, neither of which I eat. So I'm thinking that these, central markets type grocery stores are now wanting these kind of esoteric food that they sell for $100. I mean, this man was working. See if I can remember. That man never quit working. He would pull the leeks out of the soil, peel them back, cut off the greens, cut off the strings here, and tie them. He would tie three together, and he would throw it on the ground. He never quit. He never quit. And he got, he got just I can't remember the figures anymore, but it was like, I believe 12 bundles of 3 for some minimal amount. I'm not going to say it because I may be wrong. But I went and looked at the grocery store there in the Valley. I just went to the grocery store. I said, let me see what those leeks are selling for. And there was 2 leeks tied together for something like $3.25. And so he wasn't earning that for the bunch that he had tied up in the Valley. So there's no transportation cost. You know what I'm saying? Is they say, well, we have to pay transportation and blah, blah, blah. There's no transportation cost there. And yet they were charging all that amount, which is what they were charging here in San Antonio, the same amount to the customers. And so I think the product that they're growing in the Valley is different. I think it's more, fancy. That's what I think. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier when you were talking about just like how land is changing all over Texas and becoming more like cows, ranches, I guess. one of my like visions for the future of Texas specifically, because we have so much land, is to be able to grow all of our own food, as well as like create, the industries for like metal and development, right? Instead of getting all of these materials from China that like break down after a couple years after development. How to create like our own microeconomy in Texas, which just seems like it would make sense. When I lived in Oregon, I could go to the farmer's market and get so much food picked that morning. And I'm like, I live in Texas where there's farmland everywhere around me. Why aren't we having access to any of that? And how do we create that access instead of HEB having like Bill Gates? Yeah, dude. Actually, I was thinking too, I remember hearing this story from this guy who, whenever his family had a supermarket here in San Antonio, talking about monopolies, HEB monopolizing grocery stores. And in like the 60s, maybe, HEB jacked up the prices of produce down in the valley so that they could make it cheaper here in San Antonio. And then all of the other grocery stores ran out of business because everyone was going to where it was cheaper at HEB, and that's how HEB monopolized.
It's the only store in town.
It is.
It's the only store in town. Everybody talks about it.
And they own a lot of really prime property too.
Oh, do they?
The river downtown, the Arsenal,
The Arsenal
campus.
Yeah, a lot to say about them, but I feel like I didn't even touch on like everything I wanted to talk about with you, because
we got to make these longer.
Yeah, or if you would come back for a part 2 sometime, that would be.
Well, let's see what happens at this health equity.
Yeah.
We'll have something to say about that.
We'll give a report back.
Yeah.
What happens? Yeah, well, let me just quickly say that too, because that was so like, I forgot one time I went to a mental health forum thing, not to speak, just to participate. It was a community engagement meeting, and mental health is my field. And so they went through the whole presentation. They're like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. Any questions? All nonprofits. Every single question was from a nonprofit asking about the request for proposal, how much money can they get, like all those types of questions. And so finally I like raise my hand and say that. I'm like, everyone here is just asking about the logistics, the business logistics. Where are we getting questions from people who actually have mental health issues? And, that getting people on the ground, that's where we're going to know how to most effectively and efficiently distribute these funds. It was ARPA funds. And my point being that afterward, so many people came up to me and were like, nonprofit people, thank you so much. We really need those types of questions being asked. And I'm like, yeah, you're welcome. But in my head, I'm like, why aren't you asking them then? And really it comes down to survival, right? Like we have the autonomy to be able to, I guess. And these people don't. They'll lose their jobs or lose their contract with the city or whatever. But it really just is like that, where we just get thanked and given lots of gratitude for speaking up for the people, but like, where's the action from any of you, any of these bureaucratic levels?
Yep. And we have so many people in those good positions where people have moved. All the Chicanos have been become educated, and they've moved into those positions of influence, if not power. At least they're sitting on. And so, what do you give up to get there? What do you have to give up to get there? And when can those folks see that maybe they're okay, and that they can start doing something that really makes changes? I don't know, because I just like see it all the time. You have these fantastic folks, they move their PhDs or whatever, and then they're kind of like, just they move into the system.
That's
more money, more problems, and then you become in that consumer.
And and then they get consumed with whatever they have to do to keep there, right? Stay there. I imagine it takes a lot of.
You get up to that certain point, and you have to sacrifice your soul.
Yeah.
Literally.
To make hard decisions and easier ones, because there's so many decisions to make, right? So you say, well, these are easy. Let me do these.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Otherwise, otherwise you're sacrificing, I guess, your popularity,
Yeah.
your reputation,
job.
your position. Well, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't talk about everything I want to talk about with you.
There's too much to talk about.
Yeah, will you come back again
Okay.
sometime?
Will do.
Yes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're welcome.